Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. Today I'm talking to the author of the soon-to-be-released YA thriller Bent Heavens and the posthumous collaboration with George Romero in The Living Dead, author Daniel Kraus. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So something that I ask everyone that I have on is, what's your relationship to the horror genre? Was it something you grew up loving or something you fell into later in life?
Oh, definitely grew up. Sort of my origin story is seeing Night of the Living Dead when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, so very young.
Oh, wow.
But my mom was a horror fan, and and Night of the Living Dead, you can watch it and be scared by it, but if you have the right sort of audience, you can also watch it for a camp value. It can also be it doesn't have to be a scary experience. And my mom and I watched it when I was very young and then throughout my life, because it was one of those films that sort of famously wasn't copywritten correctly. And so the film could be played by anyone, anywhere, at any time. So that's why me and many, many other people grew up seeing Night of the Living Dead constantly. Because it didn't cost any network or any station money to play it. So yes, I grew up with horror, particularly George Romero, and then probably when I got to be maybe in 4th or 5th grade, really leaned into it hard with Stephen King, and I became borderline obsessed with the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
Oh, nice. That was my entry probably into horror.
Yeah.
It was the Nightmare on Elm Street one. I didn't know about the copyright thing with Night of the Living Dead until I read it in the insert that came with The Living Dead. But I guess that makes sense because I've seen it playing in the background of a lot of horror movies. So I guess if they don't have to deal with copyright stuff, that would make sense.
So it was a double-edged sword, right? So it's, on the one hand, George Romero lost out on so much money because he didn't get paid for those millions and millions of screenings. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, because it didn't cost anyone to screen it, it became ubiquitous and everyone knew it. And the fame of it, that allowed it to become famous in an old-fashioned version of virally. Everyone saw it.
I guess that's true. I mean, it's huge here. We were talking before recording, but I'm from Pittsburgh and I live pretty close to Evans City and actually go there for a lot of things. And yeah, I mean, everyone has some kind of relationship to Night of the Living Dead.
Right. When I was there not too long ago, I got a lift, I think, and the driver was saying, "Oh yeah, the woman who played Barbara is a teacher and taught my daughter." So literally everyone seems to know somebody in Pittsburgh anyway who was related to the film.
That's funny. As someone who's collaborated on projects before, like The Shape of Water and Troll Hunters with Guillermo del Toro, what was it like in this instance to kind of collaborate with a manuscript? Like, what was that process like?
It was surprisingly similar. I mean, you would think it would be very different because in this case, George Romero had died before I was brought onto the project, which is incredibly sad. But that was the situation. But what was so funny about the process was it started differently. It started differently because I was dealing with a manuscript that I had to sort of study intensely, and that's a massive process that we can talk about if you want. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening is after I, did a bunch of work up front and started working on the project, things kept popping up. Like at one point we found a bunch more pages that he had written.
Oh.
And then at another point we found a letter that he had written that outlined where a lot of the plot was going. But these weren't available to me at the beginning. I was probably a few hundred pages into the book when we got the additional pages. And then I was a couple hundred pages more. It's a very long book when I got the letter. So it was almost like George was still out there as a collaborator sending me stuff, because occasionally I would just get new stuff. So in that way, it wasn't totally unlike a normal collaboration.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was going to ask because I have a copy of it right here, and it is quite a large book.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, do you have any idea how much was in the manuscript or how much was added, or if that's...
Well, I think I don't know scientifically,
Yeah.
but my gut impression is that that George wrote probably about a third of the book, but then had a bunch of notes on where the rest of it was going. So, and that third that he wrote, this is an important distinction, isn't necessarily the first third of the book.
Oh, okay.
He wrote stuff that is present all throughout the book. So he wrote stuff that's on page 1, and he wrote stuff that's on the final page. So the material from him covers the entirety of the book. And in addition, he had a bunch of notes that guided me to certain places. So I would think that together you can sort of, credit him for at least half the book.
I was curious about the decision and how that came up, because you were chosen by the estate. So, like, did they let you know they were like considering a few people and like it got narrowed down, or did they reach out to you right away? Like, what was that process like?
I think they reached out to me right away.
Oh, wow.
I had only met George once, but I had met his I knew his manager, and I think a man named Chris Rowe, and he, I think, sort of kept track of me over the years. I had done a couple collaborations with Guillermo, as you said, so I think I was somebody who made a lot of sense. Chris, George's manager, knew I was an acolyte of Romero and a student of his, and that I was someone who had done a couple higher profile collaborations and was knew how to sort of operate in that space. And so, he consulted with Suzanne, Romero's wife, and gave me a call and changed my life.
It's quite something.
Yeah. I mean, Romero was my hero. He was my favorite artist of any type of media. So it really is a dream come true.
Wow, what an honor. So for listeners who might not be aware of the plot of the new Living Dead book, can you tell us what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of about, it's sort of about everything. It's Romero invented the modern concept of the zombie with Night of the Living Dead in 1968. You listeners know this. So this is his final word on the topic. So, he directed 6 zombie films that inspired everything zombie. And despite that, he always had trouble getting big budgets in place. His most successful films were probably his lower budget ones. This book allowed him to sort of do all the things that he could never really get the funding to do in the movies. This book is big. It's epic. It begins, day 1 of zombie. So he reboots it back to the opening of the zombie epidemic, takes it through the period covered in his films, and then goes another 10 years beyond that. So it's a very broad look that's focused mostly on America during sort of the fall of humankind, and then the rise of other things. And I'm going to leave that enticingly vague. But the idea is there's a bigger idea at play that doesn't necessarily answer all the questions you might have about zombies, but certainly shows them in a new light, I think.
Okay, I was going to ask you if we got into where the zombies came from or what's causing it this time, but we can leave that vague.
Well, I can answer that. No, you're never really ever going to learn the hard answer of that. Like, he was very explicit that he didn't want to give a clear answer. It said right in the manuscript, this will not that no one will ever know exactly what happened. But there are things that were in all of his other zombie works that were just sitting there, sort of unnoticed, that this book makes more explicit. I became convinced, at least when working with this manuscript and doing the research that I did, that there were certain things he was heading towards. Mm-hmm. And there's a big author's note at the end of the book that lays out everything that I researched and all of my theories and why any choice that I made that wasn't directly from George, why I thought it was the right choice to make based on the evidence. And so I was able to sort of build a compelling case for where I believed he was heading with some of his zombie stuff. And I think it's going to surprise some people, but really the seeds were all planted by Romero. They were all there, just waiting for someone, I think, to put two and two together.
So that's good. So you did have different notes where he said, like, definitely this never comes to pass. And okay, and when is that coming out?
That comes out June 9th.
June 9th. And you also have another book coming out this month, right?
Yes, at the end of February.
And that is Bent Heavens. I'm actually halfway through that right now and very much enjoying it.
Well, everything you think you understand will be flipped around.
Oh no, everything's going to get changed. I did see the back author's note, and you said that you looked into the declassified excerpts from the Senate Intelligence Committee on the enhanced interrogation techniques. So what was that like, looking into all that?
Well, it's not pleasant. I mean, it's widely available. You know, it's a publicly available document. It's not good. It does not reflect well upon American government. It does not reflect well upon humans. And you know, but it was one of the guiding forces of this novel. You know, the idea of torture, really, and what use is it, and can it ever be excused, and at what point, you know, how many, if you torture someone, how many lives is that worth? You know, these are impossible, or at least very difficult questions to wrap your head around. But there are questions that are not going away. I mean, I have full confidence that people are being tortured right now. We're not going to know about it until far after the fact. And I know this doesn't make this sound like an incredibly fun read, but it's, you know, the book hopefully though is an exciting, scary, thought-provoking thriller. But it just sort of has in its bones or in its marrow sort of some of these really difficult, unpleasant questions that, you know, that are going to make you have to rest. You're going to have to wrestle with them as a reader, and you're going to have to wrestle with how you feel about characters in the book as they do this or that thing that feels like it may or may not be acceptable.
I was going to ask, which came first then, the aliens, the conspiracy, or the torture aspect? That's
a good question. I think it all sort of happened simultaneously. I don't really recall the exact. Often I do. Often I recall the exact origins of books, but this one I really don't. But I know that the idea was, from its infancy, was about someone, for reasons that they thought were just, torturing an alien. And you don't have to think too hard to sort of see, just in the choice of words I'm using, the modern day current ramifications of what we're talking about. You know, I think, you know, sometimes I've described the book, it sounds kind of flippant, but as E.T., except that the kids who find E.T. torture E.T. So it sounds pretty horrible, but in a sense is kind of true. I mean, it's nice that the kids in E.T. found E.T. and they, you know, put a sweatshirt on him and drove him around, but it could have gone the other way, you know. They could have found E.T., who's kind of cute, but he's also kind of weird looking, and decided, we're gonna have fun with this alien in a different sort of way. So I think, you know, it's possible that that I even started thinking about these things as a kid when seeing E.T. Like there's that scene in E.T. that has scarred a lot of people my age, where E.T.'s he gets sick and he's all white and he's lying in a ditch, and it's a really unsettling image that really sort of was traumatic for a lot of kids when they saw it. And that's the kind of image that I'm playing with here. Yeah, it's it's a book that's tough in some ways, but hopefully is, you know, at the first and foremost though, still good reading entertainment.
Yeah, I would say it's very, very readable. I would say it's quite dark for a young adult book. And was there a particular reason you chose to have teenage protagonists?
It always just seemed the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
Again, E.T. dealt with younger people. I think it'd be easier to come down harder on older people. I like the idea that we have teenagers who are still sort of figuring out their way in the world and figuring out their moral codes, have kind of being thrust into this situation that they're not entirely prepared for. And for some reason, I'd always centered the idea of the story around, one of the teens' fathers being abducted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the gist of the book. Is the main character, her father, believed he was abducted by aliens and raved about it, and everyone in town thought he was crazy, and then vanished. And of course, no one actually believed his vanishing had anything to do with aliens, including his daughter. But he set these traps up all over his property so he could catch the aliens when they came back to get him. And sort of as a habit, the daughter and her friend Doug, every Sunday they go and reset the traps. And what happens in the early part of this book is they finally catch something. Just when she's about to take down the traps for good, they catch an alien. So that's the sort of setup. I always thought of it that way. I wanted a young person dealing with a sort of a parental loss.
Yeah.
To give them something to really be angry about,
mm-hmm.
and to want answers from the alien.
I was going to say it definitely elevates the emotional stakes. You have had quite a year because I saw that you just teased another project that's coming out.
I've had, this is a very unusual year for me where I'm going to have 5 books out in 12 months, which is highly, highly unusual and will never happen again, God willing. And really it's just a sort of confluence of factors that mostly have to do with all 5 books being wildly different from one another, mm-hmm. and different audiences. There's one for kids, one for teens, there's an adult book, there's a graphic novel, so there's a crime novel. So they're all very different audiences. They don't really compete with each other. But yes, so I have Bent Heavens coming out in February and The Living Dead coming out in June. And this fall, I have the first book in a trilogy that's called the Teddies Saga. That's the name of the trilogy. And it's a book for middle grade aged kids. Though I think, again, like most of my stuff, it reads up pretty well. I think even adults will get something out of it. And the first book is called They Threw Us Away. And the premise of the trilogy is that there's this group of teddy bears who wakes up in a trash dump. And they don't know why they were thrown away. They're brand new. And so they go on this long, harrowing 3-book journey to try to figure out what they did to make everyone throw them away and try to redeem themselves in some way.
And so these are teddy bears?
You heard me right, yes. These are teddy bears.
Okay. I've been watching the Toy Story movies with my son because he's become obsessed with them on Disney+. So,
mm-hmm. Well, I think the publisher describes the Teddies Saga as Toy Story meets Lord of the Flies.
Ooh, I like that.
So it's got a little bit of Toy Story in it, but is far darker and spookier.
You're following the toys that were not so lucky.
Exactly. Very unlucky.
So I noticed that when you sign up for your newsletter, you get a doc that has some suggestions for movies that people might not have seen. So have you come across anything recently that you think our listeners might enjoy, something off the beaten path?
Yeah, if you go to danielkraus.com, you can sign up for my newsletter and it'll kind of send you this document that has my favorite obscure horror films. And most of them are pretty obscure. You probably haven't seen any of them. And some of them, actually, you probably won't be able to find.
I'm like, I hadn't heard of any of them, so.
Yeah, there's one or two on there that you're going to have to struggle to see. But most of them are available in some way, at least on YouTube or something. Let's see. I mean, there's so many I could talk about. There's one that's not on that list that I like. It's a 2007 film, a Japanese film called Exte. I don't know how exactly you say it. It's EXTE : hair extensions.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a very weird title, and it is about evil hair extensions. I don't remember exactly how these evil hair extensions come to be, but somehow there's a salon in Japan, and they're giving people evil hair extensions, which sounds ludicrous, but it's so good, and it's kind of funny, I guess, because of what we're talking about, but it's actually pretty spooky too, and the effects are just amazing. Anything and much more than that you could imagine happening with hair happens in this. Just hair flying all over the place and filling up rooms and shooting out of people's faces, and it's really cool. It's the kind of discovery, definitely, that I like to share with people.
And where'd you find this one?
I believe I saw it via Netflix DVD, which is not a service many people use anymore, but still is a way to see some obscure things that you can't stream.
All right, we'll have to put that in the show notes in case people want to check that out. Evil hair extensions. So do you have a favorite horror subgenre that you like to look out for?
Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of body horror, which is, as your listeners know, sort of takes on the malforming human body in a way. Sort of David Cronenberg is the most famous practitioner of it. Yeah, I think I like that genre because it's one of the few that can actually sort of affect me, emotionally. Like, I love horror movies, but I very, very, very rarely am I scared by them. And even with body horror, I'm not really ever scared, but they do provoke a reaction, and that even if that reaction is disgust, I am the kind of person who does want to react to art. Like if something makes me laugh, or or in rare cases feel scared or whatever, or just provokes me in some way. That's really what I'm looking for. I want to feel something, whether it's a pleasant feeling or not. So body horror tends to, as a horror subgenre anyway, tends to have that effect on me.
Yeah, I think for even the most hardcore horror fans, some of that stuff is hard to watch.
Yeah, it is. It can be, and there's definitely examples out there that are just kind of junk, and I don't mean that in really a prerogative way, but are just sort of shock pieces, and there's maybe a place for that, but some of the great stuff, like the Cronenberg films, they're really, really interesting works of art that sort of force you to look inward in a way that most genres don't.
I do have some listener questions for you. Jason White wants to know which of the Romero's Living Dead movies is your favorite.
That's a great question. I think sentimentally, it's Night of the Living Dead. It's the movie that I've seen more than any other movie. It's not even really like a movie to me anymore. It's more like an album. It's like a piece of music that I know backwards and forwards. So that's probably the real answer. Mm-hmm. That aside, I'm a big fan of the third film, Day of the Dead. I think it's just a really sharp, efficient movie that is so much smarter than almost any other horror film out there. And I really am a fan of one that a lot of horror fans haven't even seen, his final film, which is called Survival of the Dead. I really think that's a really, really smart, underappreciated film that people need. It'll have its due. It'll have its day, but it hasn't happened yet.
When did that one come out?
2009, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've heard of it. Well, I haven't delved too much into the Living Dead franchise, to be honest.
Well, the first three are, considered just stone cold classics. Mm-hmm. And then generally, the latter three are considered less so. I think all six are quite good. The first three are, of course, untouchable. But I think the latter three are all great films.
Danielle wants to know what your favorite Halloween candy is and what your inspiration was for blood sugar.
Oh, very good. My favorite Halloween candy. So Blood Sugar, just to give you some sort of reference for this question, Blood Sugar was published in October of last year and is about, it's sort of based on the urban legend of somebody handing out poisoned Halloween candy. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of why they're asking this question. Favorite Halloween candy, I think back in the day it probably would have just been something like Snickers, because it felt like it was the most bang for your buck. I always had sort of a soft spot for candy corn, which I know some people really hate. And then, I always sort of liked Bit-O Honeys, which people really hate. They're sort of this oldie candy that I doubt kids get handed.
I'm like, I haven't seen that around.
Oh, yeah. I think when I was little, it was pretty rare. It was on the way out. But it was this, like, real peanut buttery, I don't know what the hell it was, toffee or something. And it was so hard to bite, it would practically rip your teeth right out of your gums.
So when you were doing research for Blood Sugar, did you find that there was any truth to that urban legend?
Sort of. I mean, the answer is yes. There are scattered incidents. There was even one this year. But, compared to the strength of the urban legend, it's people talk about it as if it happens
all the time,
when it's happened very, very infrequently. But the reason the legend is so powerful is that it'd be so easy to do. Like, it's a very plausible legend.
Where I'm from in Southern California, like the Temecula area, randomly, like recently, it was on the news that a woman went to go grab her car door handle, and someone had taped a razor blade to the inside of her handle, and she cut her hand. So it's kind of like, I know your book explores what kind of person does that, why?
Right. Yeah, and that's amazing that happened, because that's sort of a classic urban legend too. It's almost like somebody decided, read about that urban legend and decided to try it.
Yeah,
the one that you're talking about.
Odd. I guess I always think of that scene in I think it's Halloween 2, the one that takes place at the hospital. The kid goes in with a bloody mouth. They just don't really comment on it. It's just there.
Yeah, right.
Daniel also wants to know what's a non-horror book you love.
Oh, I mean, most of the books I read aren't horror. So there's so many of them, but no one ever asked me this. Let's see. What have I read recently? I read an incredible nonfiction book called The Nazi Titanic, which is this insane story about this boat that the Nazi regime built that was sort of supposed to rival the Titanic in luxury, and then how that boat ended up being sort of scrapped and used in World War II, and then ended up being used in a propaganda film that was called Titanic, where it actually played the Titanic. This was a Nazi propaganda film. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately the ship was used to, when the war was close to the end and the Nazis were moving people from concentration camps, they moved a great deal of them into this boat that was then sunk by British Army, and by accident. And they didn't know that it was filled with concentration camp victims. So it's just about the worst story you can imagine, but just endlessly fascinating. And I can't believe it's not more well known.
I think I might have vaguely heard about the propaganda film, but wow.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that called?
It's just called The Nazi Titanic.
I'll have to look into that. I had a question about The Shape of Water and the collaboration process for that, because it became a book after the movie. So was it always the plan for it to be a book, or how did the collaboration go?
Yes, it was always a plan to be a book.
Okay.
When Guillermo and I came up with the idea for The Shape of Water, it was going to be a movie and a book. And they were supposed to come out simultaneously. Mm-hmm. For various reasons, it ended up coming out, I can't remember how many months, but a few months after the movie. It was always the plan to do both.
Was it just the craziest thing when it won?
It was pretty crazy. I mean, it's not something you ever think about. That the seed of the idea is based on an idea I had when I was a kid. And that's just, not normally where those ideas end up.
Yeah. That's amazing, though.
Yeah, it is.
And I have a final listener question from Nicole, who wants to know, what is the scariest book you've ever read?
Oh, that's a good question. People tend to ask me what's my favorite horror novels, but they don't tend to ask me what is the scariest book. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I can certainly come up with one or two that I found scary. Again, as with movies, I'm very, very rarely scared. It almost never happens. There's books, though, that sort of get close. There's my favorite horror novel of all time is a book called The Cipher by Kathe Koje, Koja. And that book, although it didn't scare me, it made me feel uncomfortable. There's something about it that just kind of makes you feel sweaty and concerned. Let me think of one other one. The Grin of the Dark by Ramsey Campbell is definitely a good book to seek out. It's sort of about a forgotten silent film star. His black and white, comedies are rediscovered, and there's something very, very creepy about them. And it's got a very effective mood.
I'll have to check that out because I know someone else has actually answered that for that question.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to check this book out.
Interesting.
Okay. So The Cipher and The Grin of the Dark. Okay. Now, I do have some this or that questions that I like to ask people that come on. So I'll just give you some options and you tell me which one you pick. So first one, physical books, ebooks, or audiobooks?
Ooh, I like all three, but I'm going to say physical books.
That's a hard one for me. It's like they're all different for different occasions. They all have their ups and downs.
I agree.
Mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Jason or Freddy?
Freddy, yes. No question.
I think so too. And then I know you're in Chicago, so deep dish or thin crust?
Thin crust.
Really? Okay, I'm the same way. I love the idea of deep dish, but what's your reasoning behind it?
Well, it's so intense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a once a year type thing, maybe. Like, you can't be, if you're eating that as often as a human should normally be eating pizza, that's not good. I mean, that's not healthy.
No, it's too much tomato for me.
It's too much everything.
Yeah.
It's too much crust. It's too much cheese. It's a delight, but I mean, it's like eating an entire chocolate cake. Like, you really don't want to do that very often.
Agreed. I remember when my parents would visit me at college, and I'm like, I guess we're going to do our pilgrimage to Giordano's this year.
Mm-hmm. I only usually eat it when I have someone from out of town who wants to eat it.
It's funny. And what are your thoughts on the Chicago-style hot dog?
That I do like.
Okay.
I've got no problem with the relish, pickle, mustard, salt dog.
You have strong opinions on the no ketchup rule.
I don't have strong opinions on it. I do prefer it the Chicago way without ketchup, but I got really nothing against ketchup.
And finally, Pepsi or Coke?
Man, I don't like either answer here because they're such massive behemoth brands that I wanna go for a boutique answer. I guess I have slightly more positive connotations with Coke, but I have no idea why.
It makes sense. I like Pepsi, and every single author I have had on has picked Coke, like whether they like soda or not. So,
yeah,
no one is Team Pepsi.
There's something about Coca-Cola. It's such an old brand. Mm-hmm. You know, back in the days when it was first formulated and it had cocaine in it. I feel some sort of affection for those old-fashioned ads that I've seen of it.
Yeah.
So I think that might be part of why I say Coke, but really I don't like either of them.
It makes sense. But yeah, another one down. No one's on the Team Pepsi island with me yet. We usually end the episode with some chilling obsessions, just something we've enjoyed recently. In horror, it doesn't have to be something that's come out recently, because sometimes I'm just filling in my pop culture blind spots, like this week. Mm-hmm. So I finally got over my childhood fears and watched Child's Play for the first time, because I have just a ridiculous fear of dolls, and just the sight of Chucky has made me so scared since I was little. So I finally, since it's on Shudder, I finally like sat down and watched it. And I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people like the franchise, so I might see if I could find Child's Play 2. But yeah, it was fairly enjoyable, set in Chicago.
Yes.
So that was fun to see.
And you feel better now?
I do. He's still so creepy. Like the first time that he talks, I was still, as an adult woman, like cringing, like, oh, I don't like that. That's something wrong about that.
But do you feel like you've gotten past it now, though, that you're not creeped out by it anymore?
I feel like I've conquered it, but I mean, like if I walk by a Spencer's in the mall and they have like a giant Chucky, I'm probably not going to like touch it. I still have my, I'm keeping my distance, but I feel like I've conquered that. Yeah.
Good. Congratulations.
Thank you. So what about you? Have you enjoyed anything, stumbled upon anything recently?
Yeah, the thing that pops to my mind, I also saw on Shudder, which is a fantastic film called Knife Plus Heart, which is among horror subgenres. Slashers aren't necessarily my bag. I've enjoyed plenty of them, but they're not my favorite. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the greatest slashers I've ever seen. It takes place in, I believe, the 70s in the sort of gay porn industry. Okay. But it is fantastic. Like, it is scary, it is moody, it is beautifully shot, great acting, surprises everywhere, incredible cinematography. It's just a wonderful film.
And this is this was made recently, even though it's set in the 70s? Okay.
Yeah, it's set in the late 70s, but it was made in 2018.
Oh wow, okay. I've scrolled past this, so I'm gonna have to check this out. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's what it needs. I need someone to tell me like this was good.
Yeah, I had it on my list forever, and I finally sat down and watched it.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Daniel, for coming on and chatting with me. So just to remind everyone, The Living Dead will be out in June and Bent Heavens will be out this month. So check that out. And where can people find you online?
The best place to go is danielkraus.com, and that'll have links to my social media and, most importantly, my newsletter, is where it's really the place where I get most detailed about things.
All right. Well, like I said, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on and talk to me.
Yeah, anytime. My pleasure.
Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at BooksFreezerPod or on Instagram at Books in the Freezer. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/booksinthefreezer. There is also a Facebook group if you would like to join, where you can post stuff and kind of join in the conversation. You can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes are at booksinthefreezer.com. The podcast is on Patreon under Books in the Freezer. We have a $1, $3, and $5 levels. So at like the $1 level, you get episodes on Sunday instead of Tuesday, and you get to know the topic 1 week beforehand. At $3, you can join the Patreon Voxer group. You have first dibs on asking questions for author interviews, and you get early access to the episodes. At $5, you get to know the topics I am doing before I record them. So in case you would like to add your 2 cents or like your favorite books and movies to be included in the episode. And you also get everything from the $3 and $1 levels, including, the Voxer group and first dibs on author questions and early episodes. So that is Patreon, Books in the Freezer. Another way to support the show is on Amazon. We are Amazon affiliates. If you go to Twitter, our pinned tweet has all the links, but we have a special Amazon link. And before you make a purchase, if you click that link, it supports the podcast like a little bit. We get a little bit of a kickback on any purchase that you make, which is very helpful. But you don't have to spend any money to support the podcast at all. One of my favorite ways is seeing you share it on social media. I love being tagged on your Insta stories on episode drop day. letting people know that you're listening and spreading the word. It really helps a lot. And of course, there's always leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, which is a huge deal and makes a big difference for a small independent podcast like Books in the Freezer. So thank you to all of you who have taken the time to do that. I very much appreciate it. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_Ganya, or on Instagram at That's What She Read, or on YouTube at That's What She Read. Also, just quick side note for our listeners, I am getting closer and closer to my due date every week. So just giving you a heads up, I am working on recording an episode. So it will be a normal guest episode covering a topic and recommending books before going on hiatus. And then may or may not have one extra kind of bonus episode that's something very different after that. But I will be going on a small hiatus. I'm not sure for how long. I want to say maybe like a month, but again, not fully sure. I just wanted to give you all a heads up for that. Check the social media, though, in the coming weeks for any updates on that. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and join us next time for Books in the Freezer.